Good evening, wanderer of weary thoughts, and welcome to another quiet voyage through time with Mystroot, where the past flows like a soft stream through forgotten landscapes, soothing and slow, meant only for your rest-hungry mind. Before we begin tonight's journey, before we peel back the veil on something ancient and perhaps a little unsettling, let me ask, how are you doing right now? And where are you watching from? Is it the familiar hush of your bedroom? Perhaps you're lying on your back, letting the faint glow of the screen lull you, or curled up beneath your favorite blanket, eyes already heavy, waiting for history to pull you gently towards sleep. Wherever you are, whatever brought you here, I'm grateful you chose this quiet corner of time to rest in. If these sleepy stories calm your mind or help you drift off, please do consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. It helps me continue this gentle labor of memory, unearthing forgotten histories for those who no longer wish to be hurried. Now, take a slow breath and let us begin tonight's tale of rage and ritual, of frost-covered battlefields and the kind of silence that comes before chaos. Tonight, we'll wander slowly into the world of the Viking berserker, a man both feared and revered, whose existence blurred the line between legend and nightmare. But rest easy, traveler. This journey will not be loud. There will be no sudden drums, no clashing swords. Just images, murmurs, and snow falling quietly across the far edges of memory. Close your eyes, if you like, and picture the year somewhere around 850 CE. The landscape is cold, even in summer. We are in a land we now call Norway, perhaps on the rugged coast, where steep cliffs rise from deep, black water and pine trees lean into the wind like old men bent by the weight of years. The mornings begin early here, with the sun creeping over the sea like a tired traveler, casting long shadows across the frost-dusted ground. In a small village carved out of earth and wood, the people begin their day. Smoke rises gently from turf-roofed houses, where inside, it smells of damp wool, seawater, and porridge thickened with barley and goat's milk. The people wear tunics of rough-spun wool, and their hands are already chapped from the salt air and labor. Children help their mothers milk sheep. Men grind fish into paste for later salting. A few prepare to row out into the fjords, casting nets in the still cold waters while the sun barely warms the sky. It is a quiet place, but not a peaceful one, not always. There is a tension here, something ancient and unsaid. Beneath every wooden beam, beneath every carved rune meant to bless and protect, there lingers the unspoken truth. This is a land where strength is survival. And not just physical strength, but something deeper. A will, a fury perhaps, a fire that, when lit, could either protect the village or destroy it. And no figure embodies this fire more than the berserker. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live beside someone whose soul dances at the edge of violence, who walks among you in times of peace, but transforms when blood is near? The Norse called them berserker, perhaps bare shirt, as in those who wore bear pelts in battle, or bare shirt, meaning they fought without armor, without fear, without sanity. And even now, as the village slowly wakes, there's one man who stands apart. He has not joined the others fishing. He does not help chop wood or patch nets. Instead, he kneels in the snow beside the tree lean, eyes closed, his bare chest steaming in the cold morning air. You wonder if he feels the frost. Perhaps he does. Perhaps he doesn't. You've heard the stories. He speaks with animal spirits. He drinks potions made from herbs even the wise women avoid. He dreams of fire and battle. And sometimes, in sleep, he screams the names of those he has killed. Yet, when he walks among the village children, he smiles. He listens. He even sings the old lullabies. But something in him is not quite human, and everyone knows it. You see, in Viking culture, Honor was woven deeply into the fabric of daily life. To die in battle was a blessing. To run from fight was shame. And yet, even among these warrior peoples, the berserker was something else. A creature unto himself. It is said that when battle called, berserkers would bite their shields, foam at the mouth, and fall into a trance of rage so deep they felt no pain, feared no weapon, and recognized neither friend nor foe. Again, imagine standing on a battlefield, sword in hand, surrounded by the shouting and clanging of war. And then from the fog, you see them, men with wild hair, bare cloaks flapping in the wind, their eyes unfocused, their mouths stretched in wordless screams. They run not in formation, but as a storm, charging like wolves let loose. And for a moment, you forget your training. You forget everything. Because what is coming toward you is not just a man, it is something else. And you feel in your bones that it cannot be reasoned with. In daily life, berserkers were both valued and feared. Some Norse sagas speak of them as royal bodyguards, chosen not for their discipline, but for their ferocity. Kings kept them close, not because they were loyal, many were not, but because they were terrifying, and terror was a kind of armor. In Icelandic law, berserkers were sometimes outlawed, forbidden to enter certain gatherings or to own land, because they could not be trusted to keep peace. Their rage was seen as divine, but also as dangerous. Have you ever known someone like that? Someone so filled with raw emotion that you could never quite predict them? That's what the berserker was. A vessel not only of violence, but of uncertainty, of chaos. The line between man and god and beast was thin in Norse mythology. Odin, the All-Father, was said to have berserker as his chosen warriors, those who fought in a trance, who gave themselves over completely to his will. And it was believed that this trance, this fury, was not entirely of this world. Some scholars now believe they may have consumed herbs like henbane or Amanita muscaria, the spotted red mushroom found in forests, to induce hallucinations, dull pain, and dissolve the self. Others argue it was breath work, ritual chanting, deep, rhythmic meditation that brought them to this state. Either way, what mattered wasn't the how. It was the transformation, from villager to predator, from man to madness. Again, picture the daily life of such a man. In the early morning, he eats alone, goat cheese, perhaps thick black bread, water from a horn cup. He sharpens his blade in silence. The rhythmic scrape of stone on metal like a breath, slow and deliberate. His home is sparse. A carved animal skull over the door. Dried herbs hanging from the beams. A long bearskin laid by the fire, stiff with age. Children dare one another to touch it. No one dares speak to him without invitation. At night, while others laugh and drink mead, he sits apart, eyes watching the flames, fingers tracing invisible shapes on the table. He is not angry, not always, but the air around him feels heavier, charged, like the moments before a storm. And even when he smiles, the smile does not quite reach his eyes. Have you ever been near someone whose presence changes the room? Who doesn't need to speak to be heard? That's how he exists. That's how the berserker lives. And still, he is a man. He sleeps, breathes, remembers. Some say they suffered dreams so vivid, so violent, they awoke with bloodied palms from digging their own nails into their hands. Others claimed they had visions of wolves, of burning ships, of the faces of those they had killed. These are not monsters. They were humans touched by something darker, something older. So what would it be like to be born in such a body? To feel something wild inside you that cannot be tamed? Would it be a curse or a gift? Imagine, walking back through that village, just as the sky turns deep blue with evening. The children are tucked in beside the hearth. The wind hums against the walls. And from far off, beyond the edge of the trees, you hear it. A voice, not loud but steady, chanting, low, rhythmic. The voice of a man remembering who he truly is. The villagers do not speak of it. They pull their cloaks tighter and go to bed. They do not wish to see what walks in the woods at night. And neither should you, not yet. That is for later. For now, let this first image settle in your mind. The berserker, kneeling in the frost, steam rising from his skin, his breath deep and slow. He is waiting, but for what? That we shall explore. Slowly, gently. There is no need to rush. The past is patient, and so are we. Now that we've settled into the frostbitten world of the North, and you've begun to imagine the quiet rhythm of a Norse village brushing up against the wild heartbeat of a berserker's breath, let's drift a little deeper into the lives of those who walked between storm and stillness. Let your mind soften further, like snow melting over a low fire, and picture the pace of an ordinary day. What it meant to rise with the sun, or often before it, when the light was barely a memory and the sky held a sullen purple hue, and to step out into a world still cloaked in mist, where footsteps disappeared quickly in the half-frozen earth. In these villages clustered along fjords or tucked into high valleys, life was a pattern of simplicity and labor, punctuated by stories, rituals, and the ever-present awareness of nature's moods. The wind often came down from the mountains like a whisper that turned sharp, of a reminder that the land itself could never truly be tamed. The economy of this time was not built on coin alone, but on barter, loyalty, reputation, and shared work. You might trade a basket of dried fish for a pair of mittens spun from goat wool, or give your neighbor an axe head in return for a night's labor repairing a roof before winter. Iron was precious, was sacred, and time never wasted. People rose early, even before the cock crowed, though here it was often the first bleating of sheep or the distant rumble of waves that stirred the sleepers. They would stretch under thick pelts, their bones stiff from sleeping on hard, raised platforms stuffed with straw. The hearth would still hold the faintest orange glow from the night before, and it would be the woman of the house, or perhaps the eldest daughter, who would tend the first fire of morning, coaxing warmth from embers with dried moss or slivers of pine. The scent would be one of damp wood smoke, of cool stone, of the faint lingering smell of boiled cabbage or stew that had thickened overnight. You would hear soft footsteps, hushed voices, and maybe a child beginning to cry, though quickly hushed, not for annoyance, but because the stillness of morning was something most tried to keep, like a secret. Meals were not grand. Often a simple porridge made from barley or rye, stirred slowly with a wooden spoon, while a pot of herbs or onions simmered in another part of the fire. Meat was a luxury, most often dried, salted, smoked, and if fresh, it came from small game or perhaps a recently butchered goat shared among several families. Sometimes fish, if the waters had been generous. Butter was rare and kept for the old or sick. Bread, flat and heavy, was baked on stones, sometimes flavored with ash or honey, depending on what the season allowed. You would eat with your hands, dipping bread into stew or folding it around a piece of dried meat. Cups were made from horn or carved wood. Spoons might be bone. Bowls were passed around, and children learned early not to take more than their share. But in the quiet of these homes, in the dim flicker of morning light, you'd also hear stories, fragments of sagas, whispered blessings, small murmurs to the household gods, and always the reminder of who was watching over them. The gods, the ancestors, and sometimes the berserker. The berserker did not always live alone. Some had families, though their presence was always a matter of unease. A man who could not be roused without fear of violence was not easily welcomed into peaceful routines. Some wives of berserkers were said to sleep in separate corners of the house, or to hang protective amulets over their children's bedding, quietly chanting warding charms before nightfall. They would speak gently to him, never sharply, especially during the change of seasons, those times when the veil between the worlds was thought to be thinnest. Others lived on the fringes, out in the woods or in small huts at the edge of town, visited only when needed. Imagine that, if you were living on the margin, neither truly banished nor embraced. The people would leave offerings at your door, bread, mead, herbs, not out of kindness, but out of respect and caution, because they remembered. They remembered the raid, the way you tore through enemies like a man possessed, like something no blade could stop. They remembered how the dogs howled for hours after you returned. They remembered how your eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. And they remembered how, on the third night after the full moon, something always stirred in the woods, not animal, not man. Again, have you ever known someone whose mood seemed shaped by the moon, or whose silence felt heavier than words? That's how it was. The berserker lived among them, but not fully with them. He was both a shield and a storm. When the longships were prepared and a raiding season drew near, the village would change. The blacksmith's fire would burn longer. Warriors would sharpen blades with slow reverence, whispering to them like old friends. Armor would be patched, though many chose none at all, favoring speed and skill. Berserkers were different. They often refused armor entirely, believing it dulled their connection to the divine rage. They painted their skin, not for show, but as part of trance and transformation. Some covered themselves in ash. Others bore runes cut into their arms, reopened before battle, so the gods might see their devotion. The night before a raid was rarely festive. Instead, it was ritualistic, quiet, focused. Some warriors fasted. Others drank heavily, loosening the tension in their limbs. But the berserkers, they prepared in ways few dare to speak of. In secret groves, they would chant. They would scream. They would dance until their feet bled. Some took mushrooms, the red kind with white spots. Others inhaled smoke from burnt herbs. They would enter what they called the berserk's anger, the berserker's rage. And once it began, it could not be stopped. In this state, they were said to feel no blade, no flame, no fear. Their eyes would roll, their voices distort, and even their own kin would hesitate to approach. Some say they shifted shapes, grew fur, howled like wolves, took on the strength of bears. Do you believe such things? Or do you think these were merely tales, exaggerated stories told by awestruck warriors who didn't understand what they saw? Either way, the effect was the same. Terror, reverence, awe, and then silence. After the rage, after the raid, after the fire, what then? The berserker was not always a man of glory. Sometimes they were left behind, too dangerous to bring back. Other times they returned broken, mute, staring into space as if still lost in the trance. Some were feared even by the kings who employed them. There are records of berserkers being outlawed, of being declared varg or wolfmen, banished from society. To be called varg was to be no longer human, to be something cursed. Imagine that, living among people but no longer one of them, eating alone, sleeping with one eye open, feared by the children you once protected, and all because you gave yourself fully to something greater than self. Again, imagine it. The longhouse, the fire dimmed, the village asleep, the trees outside heavy with snow, and in the woods the sound of breath. Heavy, rhythmic. A man sits alone, his eyes closed, his fists clenched. He remembers every face he's slain. He feels them, sometimes in dreams. And though the rage is gone, something remains. A hum, a pull, a weight behind the ribs. This was the life of a berserker. Not a glory tale, not a fantasy, but a quiet tragedy wrapped in fur and fire. In the next stretch of our journey, we'll walk more slowly still into their rituals, their relationships, their downfall. But for now, let this moment settle like snowfall. Gentle, inevitable. Let your breathing slow. Let your mind drift over images. The bearskin on the fire-warmed floor, the painted face staring into flame, the murmured runes, the silent respect of a village who dared not love too deeply what they could never truly understand. This is the world that waits for you tonight. No need to rush. We will walk it together, and now, as your mind rests more deeply in this slow and snow-dusted dreamscape, let us continue our gentle journey through the cold world of the Norse and the strange, solitary path of the berserker, a man of muscle and mystery, both feared and needed, both praised and banished. And as you breathe a little slower, letting the images settle like layers of falling ash, picture this: a distant clearing in the pine forest, just before dawn, when the sky is a muted slate gray and the world feels pause between sleep and waking, the ground frosted over with silver lace, and the trees heavy with stillness. This is where he walks, not among the others, not yet. His bare feet crunch quietly on pine needles, and from a small pouch at his side, he draws herbs and twigs wrapped in oiled cloth, inhaling their scent as though breathing in another world. His chest rises and falls slowly, like a sea creature resting between tides. He is not preparing for battle today. Not every day brings blood. Some days are for ritual, for remembering, for wandering the edge of the mind. Berserkers were not simply warriors. They were thresholds, doors between the known and the unknown, and their daily lives, though outwardly harsh and simple, were threaded with strange rhythms that pulsed far beneath the surface of Viking life. In the sagas, they are rarely given voice, and yet, if one listens carefully, if one imagines the quiet spaces between battles and banishments, a different image emerges, not one of howling rage, but of quiet control, of breath, of repetition, of deliberate madness, carefully worn like a second skin. They trained, yes, but not only in weapons. Their discipline was spiritual. They did not raise swords for glory, but to become something beyond themselves, to understand what it meant to dissolve. This word, dissolve, appears again and again in the stories, even if not spoken aloud. The berserker sought dissolution of self, to vanish in the fury, to be a vessel. And as your mind continues to slow, you might begin to feel a faint echo of what that means. To become so much a part of something that you forget the boundaries of your body, your name, your place in the world. This is how they trained, not with drills and barked orders, but with rhythm, pounding drums, chanting the slow beat of a war song that began not in the throat, but in the belly. Sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, they would surround themselves with fire and shadow, walking in circles for hours, whispering to the old gods, to the bear spirits, to the wolf. The trance they sought was not chaotic. It was carefully entered, like wading into cold water, one step at a time, until the body disappeared. And once in it, once gripped by the berserksganger, the going berserk, they no longer thought as men do. They became hunger, instinct, fearlessness. Their training may have also included endurance rituals, standing in the cold for hours without flinching, holding their breath until darkness crept in around the edges, fasting for days while reciting the names of fallen warriors, or sleeping in the woods with no fire and only the sky for shelter. You see, strength for the berserker was not just in the arm. It was in the ability to withstand, to walk through pain, not over it. And it was believed that each trial brought them closer to Odin, the god of war and wisdom, the wanderer who had hung himself in a world tree for 9 nights to gain knowledge. Like Odin, the berserker gave up comfort in pursuit of something deeper, darker, perhaps unknowable. Again, imagine him seated by a low fire, staring into the flames, hands still, breath slow. Around him, the trees press in like old thoughts. In the fire, he sees not warmth, but visions of blood, of snow, of strange shapes in the sky. He does not speak. He simply watches, and then slowly begins to hum. The sound is low, round, and pulsing, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. These moments were part of his balance. You might think him always violent, but no. Like the sea, his fury came in tides, and when it ebbed, it left behind long silences, sometimes days of stillness. These were the days he might visit the old seeress on the edge of the village, an old woman with milk-blind eyes who brewed teas from lichen and spoke in riddles. She would offer him silence, not answers. She might burn juniper or pass a blade through smoke. The rituals were half forgotten even then, but she remembered enough to guide him back from the edge. Because not all berserkers returned on their own. Some remained lost. Some, after too many battles, too many transformations, were said to lose their human minds entirely. They began to speak in grunts, to scratch symbols into the earth, to forget names, or to sleep standing, as if waiting for another war. And when this happened, when the village sensed the change, they would prepare offerings, not gifts, but partings. Dried fish, a flask of ale, a carved wooden token. These are placed quietly outside his door, not as punishment, but as peace, as farewell. The berserker would understand. He would gather his cloak, his axe, and walk into the forest without looking back. Some said they walked north until they found ice that never melted. Others believed they joined Odin in the sky, riding the storm winds. And others believed they simply became wolves. Again, let that image stay with you a moment longer. The slow exile of a man once praised, the quiet folding of a life back into myth. It wasn't always tragic. Sometimes it was relief. The rage took a toll. The body aged early. Wounds that should have killed him didn't, but they lingered. And in the silence, the berserker began to feel time pressing on him like snow on an old roof. Heavy, inevitable. The people who once admired him now avoided his gaze. Children were kept indoors when he passed. Fires dimmed in long houses when he entered. He was not hated, but he was not welcome. And still, he was necessary. In times of war, his name would be called, and he would return. He always did. So let us now imagine, in the hush of night, how the village might speak of him. Around the hearth, while the wind creaked through the roof slats, someone would whisper of the time he stopped a raid single-handedly, or of how no arrow ever struck his chest, or how he once ran for 3 days without food or water to warn the next village. And the grandmother might nod, stirring the pot slowly, and say, "Yes, but he does not sleep like we do." That was always the mark. A berserker did not dream as others did. Their dreams were louder, redder, and the line between sleeping and waking grew thin. That perhaps is the true terror of their life. Not the battle itself, but the inability to return from it. They became vessels that could not be emptied, only carried. And so they walked on, even when there were no more wars to fight. Again, have you ever felt a restlessness inside you that sleep could not cure? A weight behind the ribs, like something waiting to be remembered? The berserker lived in that feeling always. Not as a metaphor, but as a reality. That was his companion. Not glory, not fame, but that gnawing, ceaseless fire. And so, as this hour deepens and your own thoughts soften like we'll pulled through fingers, hold this final image for now. The quiet figure walking the tree-line, wrapped in furs, axe on his back, his breath curling into the starlit air, head tilted slightly, as if listening for a sound only he can hear. He will not return to the village tonight, but he will remember it. Every child's face, every meal eaten in silence, every night spent between the safety of the hearth and the wildness of his own mind. There is poetry in that, and loneliness, but also something timeless, something eternal, something deeply, deeply human. Let yourself drift with that thought now. You are safe. There is no rage here. Only memory, only snow, only the gentle passage of time across stories half remembered and dreams half formed. We are only at the midpoint of our tale, but already the pace of your thoughts is slowing. Let them settle. Let them breathe. We'll walk further soon. For now, sleep beneath the stars of an older sky. The next part of the story will wait, just as the berserker waits at the edge of the woods, silent, watching, remembering. Now that your thoughts drift more freely, as if wrapped in wool and gently tugged by ancient winds, let us step further still, deeper into the slow-burning core of this cold and quiet history, where each footstep is cushioned by time and each breath reveals another layer of a life lived at the farthest edge of understanding. Tonight we walk beside the berserker, not in his fury, but in his fading, not in the roar of battle, but in the long echo that followed, stretching out across seasons and snowbanks in memory like smoke curling from a dying fire, rising lazily into a starless sky. You see, even in a time where death was expected and celebrated, where warriors sharpened blades with hands calloused by labor, and children learned to speak by repeating the names of gods and kin, there were still quiet reckonings, moments that did not roar but whispered, that did not flash with blood but lingered, slow and aching, like the creak of old wood in a winter wind. And so it was with the berserker. Though his name might still be spoken in hushed admiration, though he might still be offered the first piece of meat at a feast or the strongest cup of mead beside the hearth, the truth, unspoken but ever present, was that he was drifting, not away from them, but beyond them, into something else. Let yourself picture it now, softly, as if it were a memory of your own, a midsummer night in a village, when the air is thick with the scent of wildflowers and wood smoke, and laughter rises like birdsong from the longhouse. Torches burn low along the path. Somewhere, a flute plays, its notes winding between the huts like a breeze. Families gather outside, sharing flatbread and salted pork, while elders pass horns of ale and recount old tales. There's warmth in the air, not just in temperature, but in spirit. It feels, for a moment, safe, whole. But off to the side, just at the edge of the firelight, he sits, the berserker, wrapped in a cloak too heavy for the season, watching, listening, but not laughing, not speaking. He chews slowly, as if food is no longer a pleasure, but a duty. And when his gaze catches yours, you feel, not fear but distance, as though he is looking at something behind you, something far away. Again, imagine that. Not menace but detachment, a drifting soul still bound by a body. And this is where we begin to see the cost. The transformation from warrior to myth does not happen in one moment. It is slow. It begins with silence, with the reluctance to join conversation, with the slow shifting of the shoulders under a cloak, with sleep that is no longer restful. The berserker, once so feared for his roaring, begins to whisper in his sleep, names you do not recognize, or maybe do not wish to. He spends long hours carving in a bone or wood, not to decorate, but to remember. He walks the same path each morning, circling the village's edge like a tethered animal. And though he speaks less, his presence weighs more heavily than ever. People feel it in their bones. They begin to walk differently around him, not out of malice, but out of confusion, reverence, fatigue. Children are told not to ask questions. Wives murmur prayers when he passes. The old men who once fought beside him simply nod and look away. Have you ever witnessed someone begin to vanish while still breathing? That is what this was. A slow withdrawal, a quiet undoing. Even the gods, perhaps, began to call less often. Or perhaps he no longer heard them as clearly. The rituals that once connected him, chanting, herbs, dancing, fasting, now felt hollow. He would begin them, but not finish. He would hum the old war songs, but forget the endings. And yet, he remained. Not a ghost, not a danger, just a man whose purpose had grown quiet. And here, we must pause to understand something gentle, something important. The berserker was never born only for violence. He was born for devotion, to give himself fully to something greater than self. And when that purpose dulled, when peace stretched on too long, when raids ceased and treaties held, there was nothing left to contain him, nothing to catch the fall. Again, gently now, picture a twilight sky over the fjord, the water like glass, a pale sliver of moon rising over the trees. The air smells of damp moss and cooking fish. You hear the rhythmic chopping of wood in the distance. And there, by the shoreline, he kneels again, not in trance, not in fury, but in stillness, his hands buried in the cold sand, his eyes closed, and perhaps he is praying, but not to Odin, not to Thor, perhaps just to silence, or to memory. This is where many berserkers found themselves in the later years, not banished, not broken, simply quiet. Some became wanderers, mercenaries, hermits. Some, according to legend, became poets, speaking in strange metaphors and riddles, recording visions no one else could understand. Others vanished altogether, swallowed by forests or storms or time. But a few remained in their villages, cared for like ancient trees, no longer climbed, but still respected. Their axes hung over doorways, their stories passed on in whispers, their silence honored like a lullaby too sacred to sing aloud. This, too, was part of the Viking way, to remember, to preserve, to speak gently of those who had seen too much. The sagas rarely detail the ends of berserkers, because endings were not always needed. Some simply faded, and perhaps that is the kindest thing we can imagine for them. Not death in battle, not exile and madness, but a soft dimming, a slow unraveling of the thread that tied them to the world. And in that dimming, there's a kind of peace, not the peace of contentment, but of acceptance, of surrender, of knowing one's path has been walked, however strange or terrible it may have been. And so, now, as the hour deepens and your mind softens further, allow yourself to walk a little slower with me, down this winding path of memory and myth. Let the details blur. Let the images become fogged with sleep. Picture only this as the final note for now. An old man seated beside a long dead fire, his cloak wrapped tight, his hands still strong but stilled, watching the stars blink through a crack in the roof and humming, very faintly, the beginning of a war song he once knew by heart. Not to summon rage, not to remember glory, but just to feel it one more time. This is not a tale of terror. Not anymore. This is a lullaby of sorrow, of purpose, of drifting. And now let your thoughts drift too. We will continue, but not yet. For now, rest. There is time. There is silence. There is sleep. And now, as the fire inside your thoughts burns lower, leaving only embers, and the rhythm of your breath falls gently into sync with the long-forgotten pulse of distant centuries, we slip even more softly into the folds of this shadowed past. This quiet reflection on the life, the rage, and the fading of the Viking berserker. Let the images that now linger be gentle. Flickering light on carved wood, the hush of pine needles underfoot, the deep hush of fjord waters lapping against rock, the whisper of old cloaks brushing past, drying herbs hung from thatched beams, the slow tick of a wooden spoon stirring barley porridge thickened with goat's milk and root vegetables boiled down to sweetness. Let these be the things you hold while we continue, not with urgency, not with answers, but with patient curiosity, as if walking slowly through the last room of a house before sleep. You see, the Vikings lived not only in moments of violence and myth, but also in deeply ritualized cycles of daily life. And the berserker, despite the violent image that echoes most strongly through time, was still a creature bound to this rhythm, still a son, perhaps a brother, sometimes even a father, a man whose hands, when not gripping a weapon, might have repaired a fishing net, braided his child's hair, or patched the torn leather of his boots with a needle carved from antler. The everyday was not something he escaped. It was something he floated in between rages, between visions, between awakenings. And while the sagas shout of glory, it was these quiet in-between moments that truly shaped the long story of his existence. For all warriors, even the most wild, must return home eventually, and it is in the returning that the greatest transformations take place. Imagine the scene after a raid. After the longboat has returned through gray sea foam to a sheltered cove, the sails half torn, the men hollow-eyed and half-starved, their hands still shaking not from battle, but from the effort of coming down from it, of returning to earth after flying too close to gods and ghosts. Among them, the berserker is silent. The others laugh, relive stories, pass around skins of mead, but he says nothing. He stares at the waves, perhaps thinking of the way his blade moved, or perhaps not thinking at all. Once on land, he walks ahead of the group, barefoot even as the stones bruise his feet, and he doesn't enter the village straight away. No, he turns left toward the woods, toward silence, toward the one place that does not ask him to speak. Perhaps he will not return until morning, perhaps not for days, and when he does, no one will ask where he went, because everyone knows, or believes they do. They say he walks to forget, or to remember, that he buries his rage in the earth or offers it to the old gods beneath the roots of sacred trees. There are many stories. No one knows which are true, and he will never say. This silence becomes part of him. He is not unfriendly, not hostile, just separate, like a shadow that walks with the village but never fully inside it. And yet, even in this distance, there's a strange comfort. For in times of danger, in the face of real fear, not the imagined fear of tales, but the real kind, the kind that smells like smoke and screams, the people know he will rise. That something inside him, long buried and carefully watched, will stir again. And so, they do not send him away. Not truly. He remains, like a thunderstorm on the horizon, sometimes admired, sometimes resented, but always respected. Again, have you ever known someone whose presence shaped the energy of a room, even when they were silent? Someone who seemed to carry the weight of invisible stories? That was the berserker's presence. Not loud, but undeniable. And in his home, if one could call it that, this weight showed in different ways. His space was spare, functional, a cot near the fire, a low table with worn wooden bowls, a skin stretched across a low bench, still smelling faintly of the bear it once covered. On the walls, not decorations, but symbols, etched into the beams with care. Some were runes for protection, others perhaps meant for clarity, and some no one could quite translate. Not even the village seeress, who once looked at them and simply nodded, as if to say, best not to know. In this space, he ate alone, slept lightly, woke often. Sometimes he would sit by the hearth through the night, unmoving, as if waiting for something only he could see. Other times, he would disappear for hours into the forest, returning with nothing but a scraped knee and a strange glint in his eye. And there were nights, just a few, when children claimed they saw a light coming from beneath his door. Not firelight, but something colder, paler. And they said they heard him speaking in a tongue that was not Norse, not human. Just sounds, shapes, breath. Their parents told them to hush, to stop imagining. But the children remembered, and so did we. Let us now return to that forest. Always the forest where the berserker's other half lived, where he went to become again the thing he once was. The wind here is slow, careful. The trees creak, not with menace, but with age. Beneath the canopy, it smells of earth, rot, pine, and something metallic, the scent of old blood, perhaps, or of memory. It is here that he builds a small circle of stones, just wide enough to sit inside, cross-legged. He lays a bare pelt at the center, lights a bundle of herbs, and lets the smoke rise in spirals. He closes his eyes. He begins to breathe, not quickly, not harshly, but rhythmically. Deep in, deep out, over and over. The trance begins slowly, always slowly. A hum builds in his throat, more felt than heard. His hands begin to twitch. His eyes move behind closed lids. And he lets go of everything. His name, his pain, his past, until he is only sound, only sensation, only fire. This is not a ritual of rage. Not today. This is a ritual of survival. Because if he does not do this, he will unravel. And he knows it. Again, have you ever felt emotions so large that your body could not contain them? That is what he feels every day. And the trance, terrifying though it may appear, is his release, his safety, his sacred space. It is here, in these moments, that he remembers who he is, or perhaps who he was. He returns not just to battle, but to childhood, to the face of a mother now long dead, to the smell of salt air on a day when he did not yet know what it meant to kill. These memories do not comfort him, but they hold him. They shape the edges of his fading self. They say, "You are more than your fury." And though he may not say it aloud, he believes it. That belief is all he has left. And so now, as your own breath slows, as your body grows heavier against the mattress, let this image stay with you. The forest, quiet and tall, a ring of stones glowing faintly with firelight, a man seated inside it, unmoving, his shadow long against the trees, humming softly in a voice cracked with age, eyes closed, hands open, heart steady. He is not afraid. He is not lost. He is only remembering, just like you might in dreams. Let the force stay with you. Let the smoke wrap around your mind. Let the silence pull you deeper. We are still walking, still wandering, but not quickly. There is no rush here. Only the slow rhythm of history breathing beneath your pillow. Rest now. Let the berserker's hum carry you. Let us remain in this soft place between waking and dream, where the sounds of the present fall away and all that remains is breath, memory, and the warm hum of history echoing quietly through time. As you drift more deeply into stillness, into a quiet space of candlelit thought, we now walk further with the Viking berserker, not as he was seen in battle or in rage, but as he was felt, in moments too quiet for legend, too ordinary for saga, and yet too human to ignore. The ancient Norse believed that the world was a great tree, Yggdrasil, whose roots stretched into the hidden realms, whose trunk held the known world, and whose branches brushed against the divine. And in this great tree of life, each man had his own place, his own thread in the woven cloth of fate called WIRD. For the berserker, his thread was jagged, pulled tightly between glory and isolation, between fear and necessity. The village both depended on and distanced itself from him, and even in times of peace, that tension remained. You might find him repairing his axe by the fire, slowly binding the haft in fresh leather, his fingers moving with quiet skill, or perhaps shaping an amulet from a sliver of antler, carving symbols into it with the tip of a bone needle, the light from the fire flickering against his weathered face. Eyes that had seen too much, mouth rarely smiling, hands marked, not only by scars but by stories. Others in the village, those who farmed or fished or spun wool, might speak of him in respectful tones, never joking, never jesting, for his name carried weight, and it was said that even speaking it too lightly could stir a restless spirit. Yet despite the distance, they watched over him. The older women might leave bowls of broth near his door. Children, curious and careful, might press berries or feathers between the cracks in his window, small gifts from small hands. And every now and then, someone would sit beside him in silence, sharing a few moments before the hearth, not to talk, but simply to be present. For even the fiercest wolf longs sometimes for the warmth of the pack. Again, let yourself picture it now. An evening in early autumn, when the sun dips lower and the air begins to whisper the cold to come. Smoke rises in thin curls from longhouse roofs. The scent of stewed root vegetables and lamb lingers on the breeze. Inside one home, the family gathers, children curl beneath heavy furs, a father mending a net, a mother combing knits from her daughter's hair, all of it slow, rhythmic, lived. And just beyond that window, seated alone, the berserker watches the fire through the cracks in his own wall, his breath steady, his hands still. He has not eaten today, not because there is no food, but because fasting helps him think, or forget, or remember. And in this quiet state, he begins to hum. Not a tune of war, but something older, softer, perhaps a lullaby from childhood, remembered in fragments, carried through years of fire and frost. Have you ever heard a lullaby in your dreams? Half known, half felt, its words lost to time, but its warmth unmistakable? That is what he sings now. And somewhere in the great hall of the gods, perhaps even Odin pauses, listening. Because rage is not the only thing the berserker was born for. He was also born to endure, to witness, to hold what others could not. In the old ways, the people believed that every gift came with a cost. Strength was paid for with loneliness, visions with sleepless nights, protection with distance. And the berserker bore all these costs, not with complaint, but with silence. Again, consider his sleep, not restful, not deep. A kind of half-sleep where dreams rush in too quickly, too hot, too vivid. He might wake with a cry on his lips, or with his hand gripping the knife beneath his pillow. Or he might not sleep at all. Some nights he would simply sit, his back to the wall, his eyes unfocused, listening to the wind rattle the wooden beams. And in those moments, he did not long for company, but for stillness, for release, for a quiet that lasted longer than a breath. And yet, he rose with the village each morning, as always. He chopped wood. He fetched water. He helped mend a roof of the temple when the wind tore it away. No task beneath him, no praise expected. And when he passed others in the village path, they would nod, slowly, their eyes lowered, not out of shame, but in reverence. They knew, as you now know, that the berserker carried more than weapons. He carried the weight of the village's fear, their hopes, their darkness, and their survival. In times of crisis, when raiders threatened, or sickness spread, or famine loomed, he did not speak first. He waited, but when called upon, he moved without hesitation. He entered the trance, took the herbs, breathed the smoke, stripped away his name, and became once more the storm. They feared it, but they needed it. And afterward, when the danger had passed and silence returned, they would leave him be. Let him wander the hills. Let him cry in the woods, if that was what he did. No one ever followed. No one asked questions. Again, let that linger for a moment, the idea that someone could be both savior and outcast, both guardian and stranger, both cherished and forgotten. Have you ever felt yourself pulled in two directions, wanted and feared, needed and rejected? That was the berserker's life, every day, every breath. And yet, in the old world, there was also a kind of sacredness to that role. Among certain tribes, it was believed that berserkers were born touched by the divine, that they carried within them the spark of something not meant for ordinary life, that their rage was not madness, but vision, that their howls were not screams, but prayers. And so, in certain ceremonies, they were given a place of honor, not always at the feast, but at the edge of the circle, watching. And when the stories were told, their names were spoken slowly, deliberately, with reverence. Not for the killing, but for the bearing, for the burden. The Norse understood that history was made not only by kings and poets, but by those who suffered quietly for the good of all. And now, as you lie beneath your own roof, your own modern sky, consider how little has changed. There are still those among us who hold more than they show, who carry pain wrapped in silence, who burn quietly at the edge of every room. And though we may not call them berserkers, they live among us still, in memory, in story, in blood, in breath. Again, the forest grows darker now, the moon higher, the air colder. Our wandering has taken us far, and still we have farther to go. But for now, you need only rest in this moment. Hear only the quiet rustle of furs, the distant hoot of an owl, the crackle of a low fire burning blue in the coals. Let hold you. Let it rock you gently back into sleep. The berserker still watches from woods, not with fury, but with patience. And when the next story begins, he will walk with us once more. Now that we are nestled deeper into this quiet place where time no longer rushes and the mind begins to sway gently like branches in a midnight wind, we find ourselves tracing not only the footsteps of the Viking berserker, but the very essence of what it meant to be set apart in a world of kin and cold and quiet expectation. Still feared, still needed, but less and less understood. It is here, in the slow turning of the seasons, where the details blur into repetition and the rhythm of daily life becomes a sort of soft chant, that the berserker's days take on their truest shape. There is no sudden end to his fury, no dramatic departure, but rather a slow dimming, a wick burning lower with each battle, each vision, each moonless night walked alone in the pine woods. And it is in that long, slow quiet that we begin to glimpse what lay beneath the famed rage. Not madness, not glory, but weariness. A bone-deep fatigue that no feast, no honor, no warm embrace could erase. Imagine him, if you will, years after the great wars have ceased, after the raiding ships have been dragged ashore for the last time, and left to rot with moss between their boards and rain pooled in their bellies, standing at the edge of the frozen field, watching the young men spar with wooden swords, their laughter rising on the chill air. He does not correct them, nor join in. He simply watches, arms crossed over his chest, perhaps remembering, or perhaps not, the feel of a real blade in his hands. The others notice, of course. They always do. But they do not disturb him. To them, he has become more statue than man, a living totem of what had to be done in order for the village to still stand. And yet, he is still a man. He still feels hunger, cold, longing, and he still dreams, though his dreams have changed. Where once they were full of flames and teeth and the rush of blood and smoke, they are now softer, stranger. He dreams of birds he cannot name, of voices that speak languages he does not know, of halls made not of wood but of bone, where no fire warms the hearth. He wakes slowly, blinking into the dark, the furs around him damp with sweat, the embers of his fire long dead. He sits up, he breathes, he waits, again and again, each night the same pattern. He does not seek help. There are no words for these things. And besides, he has survived worse. The Viking world, for all its brutality, also held space for mystery. The line between the seen and the unseen was thin. The gods walked beside men. The dead whispered through trees. And dreams, especially dreams like these, were not dismissed. In the old days, he might have visited the Volva, the seeress, with her woven robes and her staff crowned with carved runes, and she might have given him herbs, or stones, or silence. But she has long since passed into the ground, her grave marked with a ring of small bones and smooth river stones, and no one has taken her place. So he keeps his dreams to himself, carries them like he carries everything else inside. And during the day, he continues on, mending his roof, chopping firewood, feeding the stray dog that waits for him outside his door. No great acts, no visions, just life unfolding, one soft footfall at a time. Let yourself feel it now. The slow texture of days in a world with no clocks, no electric hum, only the rhythms of light and dark, cold and warmth, silence and speech. A world where time is measured by the growth of moss, the height of the sun at midday, the crunch of frost underfoot. The berserker moves through this world like a stone rolling through water, not quickly, but inevitably. His movements are quiet, spare, deliberate. He speaks little, eats less, and listens always. He knows the birds by sound. He knows the wolves by scent. And in this listening, this stillness, he finds something resembling peace. Not joy, not happiness, but peace. A kind of truce between the man he was and the man he is becoming. And even if no one else notices, he does. He feels it in the slowing of his heart when he watches the sky shift from gray to rose at dawn. In the way his hands, once so quick to clench, now rest more easily on his knees. In the way he hums, not just before trance, but during chores, during walks, during long sits by the fjord. These hums are not songs. They are not even notes. They are simply breath, carried into the world like the rustle of pine needles, like the hush of snow falling on a still roof. Have you ever made a sound just to feel it? That is what the berserker does now. And somewhere, deep within him, the rage still sleeps. It never leaves. It cannot, but it no longer drives him. It rests, as he does. And this, too, is part of the story. Because what makes a life terrifying is not always the noise, but the silence that follows it. The empty space where meaning used to be, and the courage it takes to keep living inside that space. Again, picture him seated at his fire, years after his last battle, gently oiling the blade he no longer uses, not because he expects to raise it again, but because it is his oldest companion. Because he remembers every mark, every dent, every reflection in that blade, including his own. And when he sets it down and looks into the fire, he does not see glory. He sees memory, and sometimes that is enough. Sometimes, in the hush of the long northern nights, memory is all we have left. And sometimes it is more than enough. Let your mind rest there gently, on the edge of a fading fire, beside a man who has walked too far to turn back and has accepted it. Let the stillness hold you, not as an ending, but as a breath, a space, a pause in the song. We are not done yet. There are still stories in the smoke. But for now, just listen to the wind. And now, as you sink further into this vast quilt of history, gently pulled down by breath and warmth and story, let the world of the berserker continue to unfold, not as fire and fury, but as a series of slow echoes, like ripples spreading across a blackened fjord long after the stone has vanished beneath the surface. In these final chapters of a warrior's life, if such a life can truly have chapters and not simply waves, we begin to see the shape of a man formed not only by what he did, but by what he withstood, endured, and silently carried. He is older now. His hair, once thick and tangled like the mane of the beast he was said to emulate, has thinned and grown pale as sea frost. His joints creak in the morning. His breath catches on cold nights. His fingers, once wrapped tight around hilts and throats, now tremble when holding a spoon. And yet, there is still power in him. Not the kind that bursts forth in violence, but the deeper kind, the kind that watches without judgment, that waits without fear. He has lived through the changing of rulers, the dying out of friends, the loss of even the tongue he first learned to speak. For younger generations now favor simpler words, softer consonants. He listens and understands, but speaks rarely. And when he does speak, the others quiet themselves, not out of deference to authority, but to gravity. His words, sparse as they are, seem to fall like stones into still water. Again, picture him walking the village path at dusk, leaning slightly on a carved stick, not from weakness but from long habit, his cloak smelling of wood smoke and pine resin, his eyes scanning the tree-line not for threats but for memory. He watches a group of boys daring one another to leap the river stone to stone, and he smiles, not with nostalgia but with calm. He has no wish to return to youth. He has learned the weight of time, and he honors it. In these years, he finds companionship in quiet creatures. A dog with 3 legs that limps faithfully behind him. A raven that returns to the roof beam of his cottage each morning, tilting its head as if waiting for conversation. He speaks to them sometimes, not in full sentences, just murmurs. Sounds, the way one might speak to old tools or to the sea. And in return, they remain, which is in truth all any soul truly longs for. Some nights he walks farther than usual, past the fields and along the edge of the burial mounds. The air there always colder, always sharper. He passes the stones carved with runes, some bearing names he once shouted across battlefields, now weathered and half swallowed by moss. He does not weep, but he kneels. He touches the earth with a flat palm, fingers splayed, and listens. Not for ghosts, but for stillness. For that deep vibration beneath the soil that reminds him that life continues. But the story does not end with silence. It only softens. On rare occasions, the villagers still come to him for blessings. Not of the Christian sort, which is now spoken of by traveling monks and young converts, but the old kind, the ancestral kind, out of a small pouch of bones and herbs to hang above a cradle. A circle of ash to ward off fever. A whispered chant over the boat before the fishing season begins. He never refuses. He does not charge. He simply nods, does what is asked, and returns to his seat. And in that simplicity, there is reverence for the old ways, even as they fade. And fade they do. The world is changing. The old gods, once honored in longhouses with goat's blood and mead, are now spoken of less frequently, their names muttered under breath or buried in stories. Churches are being built with timber that once framed sacred groves. Crosses rise where ravens once nested. The berserker does not fight this change. He does not resist. He simply remains. A stone in the river, a flicker of the past in the present. And even as stories of Odin and Thor are pushed aside, the tale of the berserker lingers. Not because it is written in books, but because it is whispered in the dark when the fire is low. It is told by mothers to their sons when they ask about bravery. It is told by old men in taverns when silence grows too heavy. And in every telling, the figure grows both larger and smaller, more monstrous, more human, more mythic, more fragile. Again, have you ever considered how easily memory changes shape? How the same face can be feared, then pitied, then honored, depending only on time's touch. That is what he has become, a shifting echo, a living caution, a sacred wound that the village has learned to live around. And so he spends his final winters wrapped in quiet. His fire burns low. His food is simple: barley, dried fish, occasionally a gift of fresh bread from family nearby. He no longer carves, but he holds the old pieces often, running his fingers over their symbols as if trying to feel the stories etched within. Sometimes he hums, sometimes he does not. And on one particular night, when the wind howls like wolves and the snow falls heavy as feathers, a young girl, curious and brave, sneaks to his door to leave a candle. She finds the door slightly ajar. She peeks inside, and she sees him sitting there, upright, hands folded in his lap, eyes closed. Not sleeping, not waking, simply still. The fire has gone out. The dog is curled by his feet, unmoving. And though she does not understand what she's seen, she does not feel afraid. She backs away, gently, and says nothing until morning. When the others come, they find him as she did, quiet, composed, at peace. No struggle, no sign, just a man who had walked the full length of his path and sat down, finally, to rest. They bury him beneath a cairn at the edge of the forest, wrapped in the same bear pelt he wore into trance. No weapons, no great ceremony, just stones stacked with care and the humming of an old tune by those who remember. And so the berserker, once terrifying, once worshipped, once feared, becomes what all things become in time. A story, a shape in the smoke, a memory in the bones of the earth. And as you breathe now, slow and steady, wrapped in your own stillness, let this thought settle deep within, that even the wildest souls, even the fiercest fires, eventually grow quiet, not extinguished, but transfigured into warmth, into wisdom, into silence. Let your breath mimic the rhythm of snowfall. Let your thoughts fade like fog over water. And know that in another timeline, he walks still beneath stars, through forests, through dreams. And perhaps, tonight, he walks beside you. And now, as we near the final steps of our long and quiet journey through this dim corridor of time, we walk more slowly still, not because there is less to say, but because the hush that surrounds the ending of a life, especially one so deeply carved by both awe and sorrow, asks us to tread gently, almost reverently, as though the very air were holding its breath. The Viking berserker, who once stormed across foreign shores, who once trembled with visions so bright and strange that even gods turned their faces, has passed now into the softest chapter of all, memory. And in that place he shifts, not into myth, but into something simpler, something even more enduring. A whisper, a lesson, a pulse in the cultural blood that carries from one generation to the next. Subtle as the beat of wings in a darkened sky. You see, the Norse understood that death was not an ending, but a passage, a step along a greater path that wound through 9 realms and beyond. And while the feasts of Valhalla may call the warriors, and the meadows of Folkvanger may gather the noble dead, it is just as likely, quietly likely, that the berserker, being neither purely one thing nor another, found his rest elsewhere, perhaps in a quieter realm, where silence heals what battle broke. Even the gods must have wondered what to do with such a soul, one touched by the divine, but weathered by grief, one shaped for fury, but slowed by reflection. It is here that we begin to drift, not through events, but through echoes, through the small ways in which such a life lingers in the world long after the breath has stopped. For the people who knew him, who once feared his howl and later brought him stew in silence, the berserker became a story told in corners, not in the loud halls of feast and firelight, but in quiet moments, when a child asked why the forest sometimes felt like it was watching, or when a mother placed a carved amulet above a newborn's cradle without fully knowing why. They spoke of him not as a cautionary tale, but as a kind of weathered truth, the way one speaks of frost or flood, something to be survived, something to be honored, and, most of all, something to be remembered. And so, the old hut he once called home, perched at the edge of trees that still hum with wind and wolf song, remains untouched for a time. No one lives there, but no one destroys it. Its beams lean inward, its hearth chokes with ash, the roof sags under snow, but still it stands, a quiet relic of what was. Children dare each other to run past it, though some refuse, claiming to hear low humming from within. Others say the raven still visits, circling the chimney once before vanishing in a cloud. And whether true or not, these stories live because people need them to. Again, ask yourself this. Have you ever walked into a space and felt something lingering, not malevolent, not loud, just present? That is what the berserker left behind. Not terror, not wrath, but presence. And over time, that presence softened, became woven into the land itself. The trees that once heard his shouts now listen to birdsong. The stones that marked his trance circles are covered in moss, cool and smooth to the touch. And if you press your ear to them, as some still do, you might hear nothing, or you might hear breath. And so his legend changed slowly, almost invisibly. No longer the frenzied beast of battle, no longer the half-god roaring under a blood moon, but a figure of strength reimagined, an emblem of endurance, of the power to feel too much and still remain. Among the skalds, the poets of the North, a few verses even speak of such men, of warriors who burned so brightly that they feared their own flame, who fought not for glory, but because the rage would not let them rest. In these verses, there is no judgment, only melancholy, a kind of sacred ache that folds the berserker into the greater song of human suffering and survival. He becomes not an outcast, but a mirror held up to remind us of what we contain and what it costs to carry it. And even now, centuries past, you can find his reflection in the most unlikely places, hidden in the pages of old sagas, in the painted shields of folk festivals, in the dreams of those who feel too much and say too little. The berserker, in all his terrifying glory, becomes a metaphor for the storms within, the parts of us we fear and the strength it takes to hold them with care. Imagine, then, that someone, hundreds of years later, long after the last Viking ship has rotted into the sea, long after the runestones have toppled and the gods have gone silent, finds a carved amulet in the soil near a stream, worn smooth but still bearing the faint outline of a bear's head and a single rune. They hold it in their palm and feel, for a moment, something they cannot name. Not fear, not sadness, just stillness. And that, perhaps, is the last gift of the berserker. Not the roar, not the rage, but the reminder that even the wildest hearts seek peace. That even in chaos, there is yearning, and in every end a hush. Let yourself drift now, carried by that hush, through forest and snow, across waters stilled by frost, past the silent graves and leaning homes, toward the far, slow edge of time. You are not alone. The stories walk with you. They always have. And though you may never wield an axe, nor trance beneath the moon, you, too, have walked hard roads. You, too, have felt the weight of being too much. And like him, you endure. You quiet. You soften. And as this hour draws to its end, feel your breath ease into the rhythm of the old world, the pre-electric hush, the wool and wood comfort of lives lived in rhythm with wind and firelight. Let your heartbeat mimic the steady tread of footsteps returning home. Let your thoughts loosen, not with force, but like leaves falling. Let this story fold around you like fur and fire, like the hush of snow falling on a roof of thatch. The berserker has laid down his arms. The forest grows quiet. The night stretches long and low, like a lullaby whispered through pine. Let your dreams now carry you where memory fades and peace begins. And now, dear listener, having walked so slowly and so long through the snow-swept chapters of a life once feared and now remembered. We arrive gently at the quiet edge of all stories, where breath softens, thought fades, and the fires of memory burn low beneath a blanket of stillness. The Viking berserker, once wrapped in the fury of trance, once the embodiment of fearsome devotion, has become something else entirely in this final hour. Not only a figure from ancient battlefields, but a symbol of the deep silence that follows a storm, the deep soul that endures even when its flames have cooled. Let us stay here a while longer, resting in the long twilight of a winter world, where time unspools slowly and softly, where the flickering light of the hearth throws gentle shadows against the curved wooden walls of a longhouse not yet lost to history. Outside, the night is thick and full of hush. The frost clings to the corners of windows like lace. And inside, there are no more words being spoken, only the small, familiar sounds of comfort. A pot cooling, a chair creaking, the last ember sighing into ash. Imagine you're there now, lying on a fur-lined cot beneath woven blankets, the scent of pine smoke still lingering in your hair. Your body is heavy in the way that only peace allows, and the old tales drift around you not as warnings, but as reminders of who we've been, what we've carried, and what we quietly become. The Berserker's story, so loud in its beginning, has ended in stillness. No saga ends with a roar. They all end with a whisper. And yet, even as his name fades from the tongues of skalds and the pages of history turn, there is a warmth in knowing he was once real, once walking the earth, flesh and bone, struggle and surrender. And in that knowing, we come to realize something more. The terrifying part of being a berserker was not the trance, not the screaming rage, not the blood-slicked glory, but the return. The coming back. The sitting down afterward in silence, with no one to share the vision, with no one to explain the things seen in the burning dark. That was the heaviest part, not the battle, but the loneliness. Have you ever felt that? That ache of carrying something no one else saw, no one else would understand? That is the part of his story that still lingers beneath our skin. Not the axe, but the silence. Again and again, we return to it, that echo, that image of a man not screaming but breathing, not fighting but remembering, not feared but quietly seen. In every generation, there are those who carry burdens they never chose, who feel more deeply, rage more honestly, dream more wildly. And sometimes, like the berserker, they walk alone at the edge of the village, away from firelight, closer to the woods. But perhaps that is where peace waits, not in the center, but at the border where the wild meets the known. Now picture the hut again, long abandoned but still standing, half-eaten by moss and years, and imagine someone, centuries later, stepping quietly through its crooked doorway. Not a warrior, not a historian, just a traveler. Perhaps you. They sit where he once sat. They look through the same warped window at the same still trees. They breathe in, they breathe out, and for a moment, without knowing why, they feel calm. They feel accompanied, and in that moment, the story is no longer ancient. It is present. It is now. For stories are not only what we tell, they are what we remember when the world is quiet. They're the warmth we wrap around ourselves when night feels too wide. And now, as this story draws to a close and your own eyes begin to grow heavier, know this: you, too, carry stories. They may not be carved in stone or sung by skalds, but they live in you, in your silences, in your dreams, in the battles no one sees. And like the berserker, you are more than the storm. You are the stillness after. You are the ember beneath the ash. You are the breath that remains. And so, dear traveler of time, rest now. The longhouse grows dim. The fire has lowered to a soft red glow. The wind hums softly along the roof. And the ancestors, those quiet witnesses of all that has been. Smile gently as you settle into sleep. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your thoughts unspool. Let the weight fall from you like a fur cloak to the floor. You have walked far in story tonight. You have wandered deep into the frost and fury of forgotten history. And now, there is nothing more to do, nothing to hold, just the hum of ancient breath in your chest, just the deep, slow rhythm of your own story still unfolding. Let unfold in peace. Let drift. Let dissolve. And now let your thoughts wander. I'll see you in another timeline. Good night.